Hey everybody, welcome back to Draven's Den. I am Stan Miles. I know it's been a couple of weeks and I tried out that new show, Draven's Den Online, last week, and I appreciate the feedback and everybody that tuned into it. I hope to continue doing that show. We'll see Wednesday night. There's something strange about the end of May. The year is still young enough to feel full of possibility, but old enough that reality has started catching up with our plans. The last days of May have witnessed triumphs and tragedies, daring escapes, desperate last stands, and moments that changed the course of history forever. Tonight we'll travel from the frozen waters of the Arctic to the battlefields of Europe, to one of the most devastating natural disasters in American history. These are the stories history left behind between May 18th and May 31st. Let's step into the den. The Lost Expedition That Refused to Die. On May 19th, 1845, two British ships departed England, the HMS Erebus and the HMS Terror. Their mission seemed simple enough: find the Northwest Passage. For centuries, European explorers dreamed of a sea route through the Arctic that would connect the Atlantic and the Pacific Oceans. Leading the expedition was veteran explorer Sir John Franklin. 129 men sailed into history. None would return. At first, the expedition was celebrated. Then years passed. No letters, no sightings, nothing. Search parties were sent north. What they found only deepened the mystery. Abandoned camps, scattered equipment, human remains, evidence of starvation, evidence of desperate attempts to survive. And perhaps most chilling, signs that some of the crew may have resorted to cannibalism in their final months. For more than 150 years, the exact fate of the expedition remained one of history's greatest mysteries. Then in 2014, the wreck of Erebus was finally discovered. 2 years later, Terror was found as well. Perfectly preserved beneath the Arctic waters, a mystery that had outlived generations. The men who vanished in 1845 finally began telling their story. In September of 1846, both ships became permanently trapped in a pack ice off of King William Island. Sir John Franklin died on June 11, 1847. By 1848, 23 other crew members had also perished. On April 22, 1848, the 105 remaining survivors abandoned the ships to attempt a desperate 1,000-mile foot march south toward the mainland trading post. Every single man died along the way due to exposure, starvation, scurvy, and lead poisoning likely caused by poorly soldered tin cans. Sometimes history hides its answers beneath ice. Sometimes it buries them beneath rubble. The day the mountain exploded, May 18th, 1980. The morning began quietly in the forest of Mount St. Helens. Then at 8:32 a.m., the mountain exploded. Not upward, sideways. A 5.1 magnitude earthquake struck directly beneath the volcano. This shook loose the mountain's heavily distorted north flank. The entire northern face collapsed in seconds, creating the largest terrestrial landslide in recorded history, moving 0.6 cubic miles of debris at speeds exceeding 100 miles per hour. Uncorked by the landslide, pressurized magma exploded horizontally to the north, traveling at over 300 miles per hour. This superheated blast flattened 230 square miles of forest within roughly 5 to 9 minutes. Minutes later, a vertical plume of gas and ash shot 15 miles into the stratosphere. Over the next 9 hours, it dumped 540 million tons of ash across 11 U.S. states, plunging cities like Yakima, Washington, into total daytime darkness. Intense heat melted the volcano's glaciers instantly. The resulting torrents of water mixed with volcanic debris to create massive mudflows called lahars, shaped like wet concrete that tore down the river valleys and destroyed bridges 50 miles away. 57 people lost their lives. Ordinary people caught in an extraordinary moment. Among them, USGS volcanologist David A. Johnston, who famously radioed, "Vancouver! Vancouver! This is it!" seconds before the blast. Lodge owner Harry R. Truman, who had refused to evacuate. And photographer Robert Landsberg. As the eruption approached, Landsberg realized he would not escape. Instead of running, he used his final moments to document the disaster. He wrapped the film inside his backpack and laid on top of it. Weeks later, rescuers recovered the photographs. His images became some of the most important records of the eruption. Even in his final moments, he made sure history would remember what happened. The mountain dropped from Washington's fifth highest peak to its 30th. Its symmetrical snow-capped cone was replaced by a massive horseshoe-shaped crater. The eruption leveled nearly 4 billion board feet of timber, wiped out 200 homes, and destroyed 47 bridges. While millions of animals perished, life proved incredibly resilient. Small plants protected by winter snowbanks survived, and insects and spiders returned via wind currents within weeks. Today, the area is preserved as the Mount St. Helens National Volcanic Monument, managed by the USDA Forest Service for research, recreation, and education. And we're going to break this up a little bit for the next installment of What the Hell, people. The year was 1932. An Australian military operation was launched against a dangerous enemy. Not an invading army, not pirates, not spies. Emus, and they weren't trying to sell insurance. Yes, actual birds. After thousands of emus descended on Western Australian farmland, the government deployed soldiers armed with machine guns. The operation became known as the Emu War. The result? The birds won. The emus scattered, regrouped, and consistently avoided concentrated fire. Military reports became increasingly frustrated. Eventually, the operation was abandoned. Imagine explaining to your grandchildren that you fought in a war and lost to birds. History is amazing. While Australia was battling emus, Europe was preparing for something far darker. The evacuation that saved an army. May 26, 1940. The German military had cornered hundreds of thousands of Allied soldiers near the French port city of Dunkirk. Following the swift and overwhelming German blitzkrieg through Belgium and northern France, the British Expeditionary Force, alongside French and Belgian allies, were cut off and surrounded. With their backs to the English Channel, the troops faced imminent destruction or capture by advancing Nazi forces. The situation looked hopeless. Many military leaders expected a catastrophe. Instead, history witnessed a miracle: Operation Dynamo. Because the shallow beaches of Dunkirk prevented large Royal Navy warships from getting close to the shore, an unprecedented rescue plan was executed. Hundreds of military vessels and civilian boats crossed the English Channel. Anything that could float. A makeshift flotilla of over 700 to 800 civilian vessels, including fishing boats, yachts, lifeboats, and merchant craft, volunteered to cross the dangerous waters. These smaller civilian boats braved relentless artillery fire and aerial bombardment from the German Luftwaffe to shuttle soldiers from the shallow beaches out to larger warships waiting in deeper waters. Troops were also ordered to pack tightly into a 1,400-yard wooden breakwater known as the East Mole to board larger ships directly, accelerating the extraction. Their mission? Bring the soldiers home. Over 9 days, more than 338,000 troops were evacuated and brought to safety in England. On June 4, 1940, it was done, and that 9 days is widely remembered as the Miracle of Dunkirk. Heavy losses were sustained, as the Allies had to abandon virtually all of their heavy tanks, vehicles, and artillery on the French shores. Strategic survival was achieved. Salvaging the core of the British military kept the UK in the war, setting the stage for the eventual liberation of Europe years later. The rescue became one of the defining moments of the war, not because it was a victory, but because it prevented total defeat. Sometimes history turns not on who wins a battle, but on who survives one. Now we travel back to 1896. The city of St. Louis had no warning, no radar, no emergency alerts, no weather apps, just a dark sky. Then came the tornado. On May 27, 1896, the Great St. Louis, East St. Louis tornado occurred, which ranks as the third deadliest tornado in United States history and was estimated to be an F4 storm, generating winds up to 260 miles an hour. It ripped through St. Louis and East St. Louis with horrifying force. Buildings collapsed, factories crumbled, churches disappeared. At least 255 people were killed, 137 in St. Louis, Missouri, and 118 in East St. Louis, Illinois, though some historic estimates suspect higher numbers due to unrecovered victims in the Mississippi River. Over 1,000 individuals were injured. The vortex touched down shortly after 5 p.m. near Tower Grove Park, cutting a continuous mile-wide swath of devastation across the city's south side before crossing the river into Illinois. It spent under 30 minutes on the ground. The storm completely leveled neighborhoods like Lafayette Square and Soulard. It even partially threw down the eastern steel approach of the Eads Bridge, an engineering marvel previously thought to be entirely tornado-proof. Dozens of steamboats and river vessels were splintered, overturned, and completely tossed onto the banks of the Mississippi River. The disaster inflicted over $10 million in property damage at the time. When adjusted for modern inflation, it stands as one of the costliest tornadoes in American history. The disaster helped drive future improvements in weather forecasting and emergency preparedness, a painful lesson purchased at an enormous cost. Not all disasters come from nature. Some come from human ambition. The race to the top of the world, May 29th, 1953. For decades, the summit of the world's highest mountain seemed impossible. Many tried. Some died. Then on May 29th, New Zealander Sir Edmund Hillary and Nepali Indian Sherpa Tenzing Norgay became the first confirmed individuals to reach the summit of Mount Everest, the highest point on Earth where no confirmed humans had stood before. 29,032 feet above sea level, above the clouds, above the storms, above almost all signs of life. They reached the peak at 11:30 a.m. local time. They were part of the 1953 British Mount Everest expedition led by Colonel John Hunt. Hillary took the iconic photograph of Tenzing Norgay waving his ice axe adorned with flags. No photo exists of Hillary on the top because Tenzing did not know how to operate the camera. The news reached London on the morning of Queen Elizabeth II's coronation on June 2, 1953, turning into a massive global symbol of human triumph and teamwork. When asked later who stepped on the summit first, both men downplayed the question. They viewed the achievement as shared victory, a reminder that some accomplishments are too large for ego. The day a clock started ticking. May 31st, 1889. Heavy rains battered western Pennsylvania. Residents grew concerned about a dam high above the town of Johnstown. Then the dam failed. When the dam finally gave way at approximately 3:10 p.m., it unleashed a countdown of less than an hour before a 40-foot wall of water completely obliterated the industrial city of Johnstown. 20 million tons of water surged down the valley. Entire buildings were swept away. Locomotives were tossed like toys. Families had only seconds to react. More than 2,200 people perished. The disaster became known as the Johnstown Flood. The deadly timeline, how the clock ran out. Late May 1889, one of the worst storms of the 19th century dropped 6 to 10 inches of rain over western Pennsylvania in 24 hours. May 31st, early morning. The water level at Lake Conemaugh rises an inch every 10 minutes. Debris clogs the spillways of the South Fork Dam, meaning the water cannot drain. At 11:30 a.m., the club president, Elias Unger, realizes the dam is failing and instructs workers to clear the spillway, but they strike solid rock and fail. By 1 p.m., an engineer rides a horse down to the village of South Fork to send a telegraph warning. However, minor floods are so common in the valley that many residents ignore the message. 3:10 p.m., the South Fork Dam completely breaches, unleashing 20 million tons of water down the narrow Conemaugh Valley. And by 4:07 p.m., the water hits Johnstown at 40 miles per hour. In a matter of minutes, the city is flattened. The disaster was heavily exacerbated by human neglect. The dam belonged to the exclusive South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club, whose wealthy members, including industrial tycoons Andrew Carnegie and Henry Clay Frick, had lowered the dam to build a road and failed to maintain its discharge pipes. Despite widespread public fury over the negligence, the club members faced zero legal liability. As the courts ruled the disaster an act of God, this injustice sparked a nationwide outcry that eventually led American courts to adopt the legal principle of strict liability, holding property owners accountable for damages caused by high-risk ventures regardless of intent. The Johnstown Flood remains the deadliest civil disaster in U.S. history outside of September 11, 2001, and the 1900 Galveston hurricane. It was also the very first major disaster relief effort organized by Clara Barton and the newly founded American Red Cross. Today, the site of the breach is preserved by the National Park Service as the Johnstown Flood National Memorial, where rangers light 2,209 luminaries every May to honor each of the victims. Sometimes a story isn't just about catastrophe. It's about what people do afterward. History often remembers beginnings, first flights, first discoveries, first victories. But the last days of May remind us that endings matter too. The final days before disaster. The final chance to escape. The final push toward a summit. The final moments before history changes everything. And maybe that's worth remembering tonight. Because none of us know which ordinary day might become the day we're remembered for. Thank you for spending part of your evening here in the Den. I'm Stan Miles, and until next time, keep looking for stories hidden between the dates. Good night.